A Secret Service agent is disputing some of the testimony from former White House Chief of Staff aide Cassidy Hutchinson, but two former Trump White House officials are questioning the credibility of that agent. Tom Foreman has more.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now."
Cassidy Hutchinson's story of then-President Trump lunging at Secret Service agents January 6th spurred a quick denial from the man she says told her the tale, Tony Ornato.
According to the Secret Service source, Ornato was saying that this did not happen.
So who is Tony Ornato? As a high-ranking Secret Service agent, Ornato protected presidents for years. But under Team Trump, he was given leave to be elevated to a new, unusual, and powerful role, assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff for operations. There, he oversaw thousands of employees and worked so closely with the president that the Washington Post identified him as one of several people tied to the Secret Service facing criticism for appearing to embrace Trump's political agenda. Some colleagues are also speaking up. A former communications director for Trump, now a CNN commentator, says she warned Ornato of potential problems before this chaotic clash with protesters at the White House in 2020, only to have Ornato deny the conversation ever occurred.
He's someone I know to have been dishonest in the past.
Ornato also disputed talking about moving Vice President Mike Pence from the Capitol during the January 6th attack, spurring another colleague to tweet, "Tony Ornato sure seems to deny conversations he's apparently had. Those of us who worked with Tony know where his loyalties lie." For now, Trump is defending Ornato and his service.
These are great people. They've devoted their lives to it.
And blasting the hearing.
And I think they were very embarrassed by it because it makes them sound terrible.
But the January 6th committee, which has spoken with Ornato, does not seem as impressed. From one member,
Mr. Ornato did not have as clear of memories from this period of time as I would say Ms. Hutchinson did.
And from another, there seems to be a major thread here. Tony Ornato likes to lie.